And good evening on this first brisk evening of autumn of the year 2020. I want to welcome you to an evening with the candidates on LPTV, Libertarian Party Television, a production of the Libertarian Party. Dan Fishman, Executive Director. My name is Pat Ford. I currently serve as the chair of the Libertarian Party of Rhode Island, as well as chair of the Joe Jorgensen campaign for the Ocean State, the state of Rhode Island. As always, we have a few, defining motivations for our show. We want to give the libertarian community, the entire libertarian community around the nation, an opportunity to meet our wonderful down ballot candidates. As we say, the future is now. For years, folks have looked to the quote unquote, the creation of a bench, the development of candidates who ultimately could take place and take their rightful place and help the Libertarian Party take its rightful place on a national stage. If nothing else, we've proven unequivocally that we have candidates from around the nation who are ready to make that next step to elected office and to hopefully long, fulfilling, but very quiet careers, if you will, working to assume the highest levels of power and ultimately leave everyone alone, as we say. We want to challenge libertarian candidates to incorporate what we call here lunch pail issues. Remember Bill Clinton, it's the economy, stupid? Take those day-to-day issues that average, everyday Americans are facing, the normies, as we call them here in the Libertarian Party movement, and incorporate them into libertarian campaigns. Economic issues, social unrest, policing, anything that's carrying the day in our national media. We want our candidates to be practiced, if you will, and pointed in evoking the libertarian philosophy, which is so adept at really addressing any issue facing this nation. It's been remarked to me many times that folks are often shocked when asking a libertarian candidate a very specific question and receiving a very specific, detailed answer. It's easy to do so when you have a command of the facts, when you're not postulating, when you're not putting that finger in the wind to try and understand which way those winds are blowing. And instead, looking to your core philosophy, your personal belief system, to address the voter, to address the citizen. And equally important, we want to continue to build on that bond between affiliates from around the country to make folks understand how important it is to an individual living perhaps in upstate New York, to what's happening to a candidate and the challenges they face in Seattle or Oregon these days. Or in the case tonight of two Vermonters, libertarian candidates and arguably one of the bluest, most liberal collectivist pockets in our nation and the challenges they face. By the way, in last week's broadcast, which was, yes, it was broadcast live from the rec room of a gentleman running for mayor, Mr. Cleviter, in a town known to libertarians now far and wide in Burnsville, Minnesota. Yes, that was his rec room. And that was a room full of libertarians and a backyard full of libertarians listening to a comic make libertarian style jokes from around the country who would come together to meet as Libertarian Party leadership, but also to walk the streets, to work the voters, to present issues, to support a candidate who was running for mayor of a moderately sized town in the heartland of our nation. Not only was compelling, it was ennobling. Imagine how that candidate felt when he felt the full support of Libertarian Nation literally behind him on the streets of the town he lives in. And that's the spirit that if we could bottle up and bring to the nation, we'd continue to move our philosophy and our candidates into center stage here in the United States at a time when they're so desperately needed. Tonight, as I mentioned, we've got two great candidates from the state of Vermont. I had the opportunity and the pleasure to meet the Vermont Libertarian Party when they had their convention. Well, literally one of the last public meetings of a Libertarian Party pre-COVID, when we met in the Burlington Library for their state convention. Of course, I'm talking about Vermont Libertarian Vice Chair JT Dodge. He's running for for Vermont Senate for the District of Caledonia, and newly elected relatively newly elected, I should say, Archie Flower. He is running for state senate from the Addison district. Gentlemen, welcome to An Hour with the Candidates.
Good evening, Pat. Thank you very much.
You know, we're trying different formats as we go along. Since these folks are both from Vermont, we figured we'd have them on screen at once and just kind of share some ideas and share some issues on what it's like, as I only know too well, to campaign in a state whose politics, I think the term is diametrically opposed. We're trying to keep it clean here, fellas. We're trying to keep it clean. Last week, I should say, turned into a little bit of a poker game meets comedy night meets candidate night meets what we would have said back in the 80s in college as a bull session. And it was a lot of fun because we had a lot of different people pop on camera and do little cameos in honor Mr. Koviter. But tonight, before we start, is in fact a much more somber occasion, because regardless of our politics, Ruth Bader Ginsburg has passed this evening and has left the Supreme Court. Again, regardless of our politics, I would always suggest that we take a moment to those who serve honorably. And while many of us may disagree strongly with her politics and or even portions of her belief system, I believe to my soul that she acted in what she thought was the best faith for these United States. So I'd ask a very brief moment of silence, and I'd like to then reflect, if you will, on the role of the Supreme Court, and just, if you will, talk about the duopoly and how they are going to react to, in a year filled with complications and filled with drama and filled with, well, plot twists and turns. Here we go again. Thank you for that. Gentlemen, we're going to break from the norm here and go in national for just a moment. Both of you live in the center of the storm. You are in Bernie's backyard, as they say. And forgive the irony, because not that far away is the Free State Project. So I guess I would ask you, first off, what is it about the water up in northern New England that could, again, promote such two wildly different lifestyles? And then let's talk for a moment about the Supreme Court, its importance, if you will, and how you think each individual party is going to react to that. JT, why don't you start us out?
Okay. Well, you know, I was having a conversation with my family this afternoon, and it's interesting. My mother just switched, she switched to libertarian, so I got lucky there. But she started posting some things, and the rest of the family doesn't exactly agree. And they don't want to see Trump in there, and so they put a lot of pressure back on my mother when she posted on Joe Jorgensen. And the thing is it's like don't vote for the third party once again. A vote for the third party is a vote for Biden. A vote for the third party is a vote for Trump. That's basically what we're looking at. And my brother was pretty much the hardest on her, and his point was the judges. He pointed that out today before we knew about the Ruth Bader Ginsburg, before we knew that she died. And that was his point to me, was that's his big worry in all this, is the judges. And so I just think, everything is going to be lit right up again. If it's not COVID, if it's not, any number of the other horrible situations that are going on right now in this country. I think this is going to really toss a coin in the air.
Do you think for a moment that there's any irony in the fact that, in fact, it was a Republican appointee who immortalized Obamacare, and that it was Republican appointees who eviscerated the Fourth Amendment in the last term? I mean, is there any sense of just how poorly, if you will, the quote unquote liberty judges have actually performed?
Liberty judges.
Their words, not mine.
I really felt that. I haven't really felt liberty judges.
Yeah.
No, as far as liberty goes and judges, I don't know what the answer is. I really don't. Joe Jorgensen, I want to point out what she states is, and I guess I can kind of lean because, well, all right. After this conversation with my brother this afternoon, I wanted to see what Joe Jorgensen thought about the judges, and her thought on it was that it shouldn't be politicized, and that was just it. That the judges should not be politicized no matter what, and that's where she drew the line. And I'm not sure I have much more to say about it than that. Is that they shouldn't be politicized, but I'm really not sure what the answer is with judges.
Archie, what are your thoughts?
Well, first to just comment on the humanity of the moment. Cancer is a terrible thing to have to go through. My mother died from complications from cancer, so this is kind of hitting me in a very human way, regardless of the politics, regardless of what Ruth Bader Ginsburg may have stood for as a Supreme Court justice. She was human first. We're all human first. I heard this news only a few minutes before going live, and it's still kind of processing because it's a really hard thing to just think about what her family must be going through and feeling right now. And it's just going to be, this will inject an unfortunate and phenomenal amount of energy into this election that we just don't need right now. Mm-hmm. It's been insane already. The whole saying of it's 2020, it's going to get worse, that kind of thing. Well, it just did. One of the biggest possible shoes that could have dropped just did. And I feel that because of how high-pitched the politics is, her humanity will be lost in this moment. And I find that unfortunate.
No, you think back to some of the more notable passings of the past year or so, and think about the raw pleasure that the extreme elements of each political organization expressed at the passing of an individual. Again, who, as you mentioned, Archie, who is someone's family, someone's mother, someone's. There is so little humanity left in politics that, however notorious that president, that senator, that Supreme Court judge may or may not have been with respect to certain issues, that again, we walk right past very often lifetimes dedicated to public service in a form that I don't know exists anymore, because so much of public service, and I'm using the air quotes here, is so self-serving. And so I believe you to be exactly right. This is the last thing this presidential election needed, was that type of intensity, that type of negative energy. It does not portend well for the Republic, as they say. But the two of you have joined us tonight to really focus on the local, and I'd like to do that. Again, as a Rhode Islander, it's interesting because from a geographical standpoint, you couldn't really comprehend two vastly different states in a region for which we're only separated by a few hours from our borders. You couldn't have imagined such similarities politically, although Vermont, is certainly a much more rural state. Talk to us about being advocates for personal liberty, self-ownership, personal autonomy in a state that appears to many of us to be so dedicated to the collective. Archie, why don't you go first?
Well, so Vermont, like the nation, is kind of a mix of many different factors. And locally, I think we're actually culturally very libertarian. We like to live and let live. We like to, we don't like to be busybodies for the most part as neighbors. We like to be able to live according to our own conscience and our own ideals. So it's kind of a very odd juxtaposition to our politics, which is very collective and running full steam into more collectivism. Montpelier right now, I do call them Montpelier Marxists because that's what they basically are. They want that full centralized control. They want everything to have to run through their decision-making factors so that they can feel much bigger than that they are. And I find this unfortunate because we have one of the finest constitutions, I think, in the nation. And one of the key points it makes is that every bit of power that any state official has comes from the people very directly. They'd have no power outside of that. And Montpelier has completely forgotten that. But culturally, I think Vermonters are ready to hear again the message of freedom, the message of individualism, the message of a consent culture where we have each other's backs in terms of defending each other's rights. The state motto is freedom and unity, and I believe that those two meld together very well because freedom isn't going to defend itself. The philosophy can't defend itself. The philosophy of freedom needs a unified group of people to stand together shoulder to shoulder and say, no, we have individual rights. We are individuals. We do want a consent-based culture.
Has Montpelier, which for folks not from New England is the state capital of Vermont, has COVID been, as so in so many states, been an opportunity not left to waste for folks who are involved in that sort of collectivist movement? Have they sought to take advantage and grab greater power?
Yeah, a little bit. Okay, a lot. They're still in session. They normally get out in like April, late April. They're still in session. What kind of nonsense is that?
Yeah.
You know, they're trying to push through all kinds of nonsense, and they're trying to do it, you know, in the name of emergency, and it's like, you know what? How about no?
Right. Now, JT, you've been very involved in an issue that is, let's just say, intimate and near and dear to the heart of that socialist, left-leaning, collectivist end of Vermont. And you have been fighting the good fight against carbon taxes. How aggressive has been the movement in Vermont to incorporate them into the state? And where do they stand, and on what basis have you been fighting them?
Well, so a few years ago, I stood up a group here called No Carbon Tax Vermont Group, and we were already, Vermont had already endured a couple of years of pretty hardcore pushing on the carbon tax button, and it was mentioned that there was not a group and there was not a discussion place where folks were getting together and discussing this, you know, primarily. So I stood that up. So a couple of years ago, we were looking at the Essex plan, and that truly was a carbon tax in many ways. They spent $100,000 or some crazy amount of money on research and development to develop this approach. It might have been $10,000, not 100. But they wanted to develop this approach so that they could convince Vermonters that indeed we do need to take drastic action on climate, and a tax would be fair. Of course, Vermonters aren't having that. And this was the Global Warming Solutions Act. So, you know, we got through it. It's been, you know, a number of 2 or 3 years that we've gotten through this hardcore push of carbon tax. But what they learned this time, see, the thing is that the left is very organized.
Right.
And they've got money. My God, do they ever have money? And so they came again, because they have, powerful environmental lobby, powerful national environmental lobby, such as US PIRG and Child v PIRG in our state. And a number of others. We've got a number of universities that are literally educating folks on how they can get out there and protest for a carbon tax, and a number of other things. So this year it was the Global Warming Solutions Act. And what they did was they I guess, for them, they smartly decided to go about it to get our money in a half a dozen different ways other than tax. So the definition of tax is not part of this, but if you look at fees, penalties, and controls that don't go, financial controls that don't go back to the people. So what they're able to do is they're able to take more and more money out of us every year by going to an appointed committee. It doesn't come back to the people to decide. And this did pass. It was vetoed by the governor a couple of days ago, and it was overruled by the House. And so it did pass. It's pretty hurtful legislation. That's what we've been doing. We've been showing up at the State House. We wore yellow vests. Not our yellow vests perhaps didn't signify what France's did, but ours were. They stood out pretty nicely, and we stood at the Capitol building a number of times. For the most part, all we really drew was their laughter. They didn't take us seriously. They haven't taken us seriously. So that's been our fight.
Where does it stand now? So in other words, it was the veto was overwritten. What does this tax in the case of this particular piece of legislation purport to do? Is there actually going to be a carbon fee, or is this in a carbon tax, or are they going to use alternative methods to fight or create carbon offsets? Give us a little detail on that.
Yeah, so what they're gonna do is they're gonna use subsidies, and then there's this sort of equity conversation, and so essentially what they're doing is they're using something called intersectionalism, and they're taking the poor. They're taking the poor and they're intersecting it with the climate, and they're saying the poor are hurt by the climate more than anyone else. And so therefore, the humanity of taking the money from the people, you can feel good knowing that a good chunk of that is going to go to meet the Paris Climate Accord, and another good chunk is going to go to the poorest in our population. And among other things, there's a lot of other carbon dioxide-based subsidies in Vermont. And one, for instance, a fee that we paid on our electric bill, it goes to something called Efficiency Vermont, which then creates subsidies so people can buy inexpensive appliances. And, I could speak to that more, but it's not something I support.
Right. As a solid libertarian, you see right through it. Now, Archie, what impact does this type of grassroots kind of make it up as you go economics have on hiring, employment, and the economy at large? What's the economy like right now in Vermont, particularly as we're under siege with COVID?
There's an economy in Vermont.
Okay, silly mate.
That's really not that far away. I mean, they dig in their claws so deep that business, it's a very anti-business climate. And I find that despicable on many levels, and I find it unfortunate on other levels. And you don't have to be anti-business to be pro-environment. You don't have. Vermonters, we care greatly about the natural beauty of our state. And for Montpelier to try to dictate, well, you have to, do this many feet from XYZ, or, you can't build bigger than X amount of square feet, or, it's all, micromanagement nonsense. And business should be left up to business people. And the people that get elected typically are not business people. I think Ayn Rand called them men of pull rather than, entrepreneurs. And when you play politics and when you make deals in back rooms, even without a whole lot of money changing hands right then and there, you end up, now I'm trying to remember which economist it was that spoke of opportunity cost. But if you don't look at what you are giving up, you don't know what the real cost is. And they don't do that. They don't care. They're like, oh, it only costs $1 billion. Let's do that over the next 10 years. Or they're not looking at what they are missing out or what we are missing out on because of their decisions.
Yes, I wonder, is there a Wesley Mooch in Vermont waiting for us now? And of course, if you haven't read Atlas Shrugged and you're listening to this, please, after the show tonight, grab a copy, order one on Amazon, whatever, read it. Because go ahead, buddy.
You speak of Wesley Mooch, and it's been a long time since I've read the book, but I still have kind of a picture of what Rand described that person as, and there are some legislatures that fit.
Right,
there really are, and it's kind of scary.
And the question is there a Hank Reardon in Vermont? That's what we'd like to know. Both of you have alluded to the fact that how well organized, how well monetized the progressive movement, collectivist movement, and particularly the environmental movement is in Vermont, and that applies nationally. The biggest lesson that I take from that, and again, Rhode Island's a very similar state in so many ways, that they show up. It's a positive show tonight, and I want to stay positive. But what lesson can libertarians take from progressives in showing up? How important is it to show up?
Well, yes, that goes to something very deep in the liberty movement in general, and even within the party. So I joined the party officially in 2017, but I've been philosophically a libertarian for a very long time. One of the things that bothers me the most is vote shaming, where a certain, I'll call it flavor of libertarian, will say there's no point in voting. Why are you voting? If you vote, then you're just as immoral as the people that you vote for to put into office, that kind of thing. And it's like, the other side doesn't do this. The other side encourages everybody to vote twice. And we have to stop telling our people not to vote. If we want to get this changed, if we want to turn this around, we need the numbers, period.
Sometimes it just comes down to warm bodies. And by the way, it's a great segue because there is an event coming up that people can in fact show up to, and it's going to happen a couple of times. We'll be announcing the exact location in the next week or so, but our candidate, President Jo Jorgensen, is going to make a New England swing, and she's going to go to a couple of municipalities, a couple of towns in Vermont. She's going to make several stops in New Hampshire, several stops in Maine, and she's even coming. This is actually, talk about a Hosanna moment. A libertarian presidential candidate coming to the state of Rhode Island, the ocean state. We're besides ourselves. We're not even sure what to do. We're in a catatonic state, somewhere in the fetal position. But ultimately, if liberty folks in New England, wherever they are, want to make a statement, kind of that line in the sand in 2020, it's to show up, to make at least one, even if it's not in your town, even if it's a drive, to show up at least once. If you're in New England on Joe's New England tour, because we haven't had the opportunity to have kind of that big New England swing really almost in a generation. And there's a lot of reasons for that, a lot of them legitimate. Let's just say, but it's our time now. It's our chance now to make that statement. Now, on top of that, speaking at that, will be a couple of our great Vermont candidates, the two gentlemen you have on here tonight. They'll have an opportunity to speak to Libertarian Nation as to what it means to fight for the rights of the individual in one of the most challenging environments literally in America. And I know we all kind of feel that way. We had a great candidate on 2 weeks ago who was campaigning for Illinois State Senate from the West End of Chicago. My God, the bravery of this individual, the guts, wow, just as like most like the candidates we've had on all throughout the show, just impressive stuff. But this is kind of special to us here because everybody on this show right now is essentially a New Englander, and we've been waiting for this moment. So I'm asking New Englanders to take advantage of it. Go see these two gentlemen in Vermont. If you can't make Vermont, New Hampshire, Maine, Rhode Island, holy cow. Now, let's talk about campaigning in Vermont. For both of you, your districts, give us if you will, kind of a reflection on the size, the location, the economic makeup, and quite frankly, how many votes it would take to win. Give us a little snapshot.
Well, my district, Caledonia district, is it's very rural. There's a couple of what we consider urban spaces are really not urban spaces compared to Rhode Island. But there are a couple of what I can say is it's about 8 towns, and they're very rural, and it is not difficult to campaign. I mean, we can do a lot with the internet, but the thing is that in these rural spaces, there's folks without internet. Lots of them. We have a real problem in my district. And so to reach them, we have to get right out there and get in their spaces. And one of the ways I've been doing that is getting out on the streets with people waving signs. And other ways is that I'm planning on doing some actual door knocking, which is everybody has to think about how they're going to go about that, whether they're going to do it. If you're campaigning, are you going to knock on people's doors? Some people are going to be uncomfortable with that. I'm just approaching it. I put the mask on, I knock on the door, I step back, I give them some space. And from what I've seen so far with other candidates, they're pretty gracious. People are looking forward to speaking with those that are running.
Any idea roughly of a head count of how many voters there are in your district?
Well, I think that there's about 32,000.
Mm-hmm. So you've got some work to do.
Voters, we have a real problem with people not voting.
Really?
So yeah,
interesting.
There's about 32,000 eligible.
Right, and so the exigent challenges in the absence of significant internet coverage, and with the newspapers being covering really at the state level. I've spent some quality time with the Burlington paper over the last few weeks, and I actually had read it a few times when I was heading up your way. And their focus, to say the least, it seems like a great little paper, is rather unique and probably not heavily vested into individual personal liberties. Just saying.
No.
Kind of.
Yeah. No.
How do you think in your district, JT, how will people react to a candidate like Jo Jorgensen? What do you think their thoughts are?
Well, their thoughts are how to remove Donald Trump for the most part. That's what I keep hearing. That said, when I've presented Jo Jorgensen to folks, they seem to agree with the large majority of people agree with they have that caveat though. If it wasn't Trump, that's what they keep saying. That said, we can add my mother to the list of voters for Jo Jorgensen.
Excellent. Now, Archie, give us a little bit of background on your district. What the head count is, how you are approaching the campaign. Is there much more media available to you to take advantage of?
So there's about 30,000 eligible voters here. The number to beat would be just about 10K. There are 2 state Senate seats for this particular district, Addison County. Our legislature, our Senate, is divided kind of strangely. Chittenden County, right to the north, has 6 state senators. Some counties have only 1, so it's kind of a weird mix. Addison County has 2, and the number to beat for the lowest is just about 10K from 2018. Campaigning is kind of different with COVID. I ran in 2018 and I'm running now. And with a pandemic going on, it's kind of throwing a few changes into the works, obviously. We do have some pretty good media here, the Addison County Independent. Now I'm trying to remember the host of the debates that I've been invited to, and I don't remember the actual name. It's a kind of a public TV station type deal. We did that in 2018, and that was a huge amount of fun. And after the first round of questions, I'm like, yeah, I belong on this stage. So that was fun. That's coming up again. We have other media that's going to be covering. So I think that in terms of media, we have a bit more because we have a big college right here in Middlebury, which is the shire town of the county. So that kind of changes the layout just a little bit. But, you know, every place is going to be different, and that's fine.
Let's talk about college impacts, because like states across New England, there are some astonishingly good schools in Vermont. Not only UVT, the Catamounts, whatever a Catamount is, I've never quite figured that out. But of course, you are home, at least spiritually, to one of the Ivies. What impact does the college community have, if you will, on the politics and sort of the ethos of Vermont?
Well, Middlebury College is distinctly leftist. There's no getting around that. They are very much to the progressive bent of things. They're very much to the leftward trend of things. They don't make any. They don't hide it. They don't pull their punches. That the community itself, there's definitely some that favor the college and are therefore more left. And then there's a certain amount of people that are like, yeah, well, they're the college, we're the town. So you just got to know who you're talking with.
Right. Now, it's interesting to me because in so many places in academia, the use of the shoutdown, if you will, to diminish guests, to diminish debate, is taking place. And I guess there was a incident just 2 years ago at Middlebury, I think it was Middlebury, where the libertarian economist Charles Murray spoke, and the Atlantic magazine, the now infamous Atlantic magazine, called it "responds to a protest gone wrong." Because, and I'm going to speak about Rhode Island. Rhode Island is a very progressive state, and there is a great deal of that shouting down, if you will, of dissenting voices that takes place. Is Vermont that aggressive in opposing, or is that really just an extreme academic element?
I think. Go ahead. I think that's an extreme academic element. Sorry, Archie. I didn't mean to step over on you.
Yeah, no, go ahead, JT.
I don't think it's something that happens all the time, the screaming down. But that was a fairly infamous situation. It wouldn't surprise me to see it again over on that campus.
So what
the nature of that.
So what you're saying in our location scouting for the Joe Dworkin appearance, Middlebury is probably not on the list. Is that what you're telling me? Or should
might be a challenge.
Well, we will attract a crowd, is what you're saying. No, that
will.
Issues. You know, very often the focus of the show is exclusively on issues. There's some dramatic events taking place in terms of the news cycle, literally as we chat tonight. Pre-COVID, what would you have said in addition to the environment? That's why I wanted to make sure I spoke with JT. And by the way, congratulations, JT, on that effort, because as tough as the environment it is, that's a type of activism that communicates to a voter a level of sincerity, a level of involvement, a level of, if you will, engagement with the community, as well as a great deal, and I'll say this to all of you that I met in Vermont, a great deal of personal political courage, because it's awfully easy in a lot of places in this country to be liberty-minded, or I should say easier. your willingness to challenge what I call third rail issues certainly defines you on multiple levels. A lot of the folks that oppose you weren't going to vote for you anyway, but it sends a clear message to people in Vermont that if you're looking for a liberty a liberty home, if you will, that the Libertarian Party of Vermont is in fact the place to go. That you're not going to define yourself every 2 to 4 years based on polling and whether or not you've achieved the Oval Office. And there's precious little of that in this country. But issues that would have existed pre-COVID, how was the economy? Was this encroaching collectivism strangling the life out of it even then?
Well, we're in a lot of debt. Our economy is not good. We have $500 billion in unfunded pension debt. That's approximately $7,500 for every man, woman, and child in Vermont. Mm-hmm. Just to pay up the pension debt on the state workers and the teachers unions pension contracts.
Wow.
So that is devastating to us, considering the approximately 460,000 people we have in the state. Mm-hmm. And people people are leaving. It's difficult financial times for folks in Vermont. If you're not already well plugged in, you're going to struggle here. At the moment, that's just the way it is. So that would have been the conversation for me. Would have had a lot to do with the pension debt, and it would have a lot to do with the Global Warming Solutions Act and those types of things. I point out a lot, like we have a lot of really fun facts. They're hitting us really hard with the Global Warming Solutions Act and a lot of this carbon tax fee penalty stuff. And the thing that I like to point at them is, they feel as if, their point is that we're going to have a 150-foot high wall of water. And my point is that we only have 460,000 people. We have the smallest carbon footprint in the country. We have the smallest greenhouse gas footprint in the country. We have the fewest cars on the road. We have a top 10 cold environment as far as winters go in the States. We have a lot of challenges when it comes to, our economy is challenged just by nature on a regular basis. But what we could do is we could relieve, we have this thing called Act 250, and it makes a very complicated mess out of doing business in this state. And so, with the pension debt and with all the carbon tax stuff, I mean, we have a lot going against us, and that's probably a lot of what would have been talking about pre-COVID.
Interesting. Archie, what saith of the farming sector, the agrarian sector? We all, probably because we've eaten too much Ben and Jerry's, have this charming perspective of expensively clothed farmers, whiling away the day while they make a fortune off of milk and other dairy related products. What's the reality of farming and family farming, if you will, in Vermont?
Well, so the unfortunate truth is that Montpelier is, in their desire to manage everything, they're also trying to manage the farms, and they're not businessmen or women, and they're not farmers either. They don't understand what it takes to actually run a farm. And as a major caveat, neither do I. I am not a farmer. I've never lived on a farm. I've never stayed on a farm long enough to see how it really works. So what I do is I actually listen to people who do farm, and they're telling me that all of this stuff that Montpelier wants to do is hurting them, and it's backwards, and it's not really helping in any serious way. And one of the big problems, one of the big issues is they try to blame farmers for runoff. But a lot of our big cities, they're the ones directly responsible for literal crap going into Lake Champlain on a regular basis. It's a regular news story. And if they can't even clean up their own toilets, why should they be in charge of the farms? Montpelier they have a love affair and an addiction of control and micromanagement, and it doesn't work for any sector of the economy.
Are so many family farms across the country are literally collapsing, and in many cases, the if you will, the tariffs of the Trump administration were sort of the final blow. If you were on the wrong side of some of these tariffs, particularly with pork production and corn production, and some of the areas where you were in direct competition with feeding China, you know, oh my. Are family farms collapsing? What is the state of the family farm industry in Vermont?
Yeah, I think we're at our lowest point that we have been in a very long time. And we hear those stories in the news too often that a farm just down the road from us is going out of business, and they've been in business in the family for the last 4 or 5 generations. And it's really sad that that's a common enough news story that it doesn't really rate as news in a sense.
JT, what's your observation on the family farm in Vermont? I mean, and how much of, we talk about dairy farming, and dairy farming has been pillaged by control and market interventions. Is that, in places like New York and New Jersey and Connecticut, dairy farming is virtually on a state of collapse, even among some of the bigger players. Is there that same level of government intervention? I'll throw this out to both of you, happening in Vermont?
Well, I'd say that the dairy industry has largely already collapsed. I mean, in Vermont, it largely has. There's very few dairy farmers left. And it was a couple of years ago, really, pre-COVID, but during COVID, it's been terrible. But, a couple of years ago, they were talking about, what was it? They were losing, now, I don't remember the numbers, but they were just drastic numbers. We were losing every single year over year, we were losing these farms. And it has only gotten worse, and it's only gotten more challenging, and taxes have only gone up. So all those things together have hurt the family farm. And in times when we need these family farms we've seen how the economy and the distribution process kind of broke when it, a while back when COVID-19 first kicked in. And a lot of us have been embracing local food and local farming. But it's just really, really challenging as far as the economy goes. And, it's a bad state of affairs.
And so many, I'll call them boutique farmers who may have, in a large sense, their product mix diverted wildly from, say, farmers of just 30 or 40 years ago, had really focused on the restaurant sector, the emerging hospitality sector, to support their industries. I mean, because quite frankly, their economies of scales were such that in order to be successful, they had to focus on, heritage products, boutique products, things of a higher end that could probably only be sold at what we lovingly refer to as either your local whole paycheck or at one of those hoity-toity bougie $25 a plate, $30 a plate restaurants. Which brings us front and center to COVID. We've only got a few minutes left, but JT, how restrictive, how obstructive has been government, and how accountable have they been to the economy during the period of what I call the dread COVID?
How accountable have they been to the economy?
Yeah.
Well, what I can say is, first of all, Vermont is kind of, we've somehow achieved this standing of having the least amount of COVID or something. We were a short time ago. The governor has been standing out there doing, every day he's been having meetings, and they've been discussing with the doctors. They had Dr. Fauci on the other day. They have done a lot of damage to the economy, though, shutting things down. So that's the thing, is they shut a lot of restaurants down, and they've limited a lot of businesses. The thing that I believe is, I think that a lot of this could have been done. Now, I know it's 2020 hindsight, and I don't pretend to know all the answers at the time. But I think that if we had, the thing is we all needed the data, right? So we need the data on who's really dying and who's really getting sick. And we didn't really seem to have that early on. But once we did start getting it, it seemed like we were getting more and more extreme with our approaches on how to shut things down. And once we started getting really good at shutting things down, we just, like a steam engine, we just get going faster and faster. And now I think I'm not going to say that COVID-19's gone away, but I'm going to say that we've figured out, I think, who the populations are that are seriously harmed for the most part. And those are the populations. I think people need to get back to work. People need to be able to start producing again. And those that are, we need to take proper care of ourselves when we're going. And I think we have the ability to. We're pretty smart folks. We can put a mask on when we're in close proximity, or just maybe not the mask, but just keep the distance and wash your hands a lot. Those two things are going to do a lot. But as far as Vermont goes, yeah, we're really hurting. I feel like we're turning things back on slowly. But who knows what's going to happen? I know that the COVID numbers can go up, and they've already told us that they'll start shutting things down again as soon as that happens. So,
Archie, we went as a nation and at the state level from trying to flatten the curve to literally trying to create a society from which no one can gain harm, no one can ever become ill, where we've moved to almost a zero tolerance for illness in this. What has government been behind all that for? And do you think we've hopelessly lost our sense of direction in this?
The biggest peeve I have, certainly with Vermont, is the overreach in terms of just staying in session. They're staying in session, and they're not trying to do so to focus on the pandemic or any issues related to COVID. They're doing all kinds of other stuff, pet projects that they wanted to do for a long time. And they're like kids with their hands in the cookie jar in that sense. In terms of actual solutions from the government, it's pretty much just been closed down and there you go. And I think that's a shame. I think JT is right that Vermonters are smart enough and capable enough to keep their distance and keep a mask on. And we know that, this disease affects certain parts of the population worse than others. And we really should be able to open up a little bit more than what we have been. The economy isn't magical. A lot of people seem to think it is. A lot of people seem to think that it'll just come back. But, and to look at a national figure, if memory serves, I was reading a post about how many businesses, so Yelp keeps track of small businesses, and it was close to 100K that are permanently shut now. And that's insane. It's like this kind of damage will take many years to reverse. And the opportunity cost, the unseen, what are we missing because of all this damage that we can't put on a ledger sheet? How many kids of these mom and pop stores, how many kids aren't going to go to college because their parents didn't have the money because their business went out of business? And government seems to be doing only one thing, and that's just writing a bigger check. Here you go. And they don't care when it's going to bounce, because when it does bounce, they're going to be retired. They're going to be, they're not going to be holding the bag for the blame.
My biggest fear, and before we go into my favorite part of the show, which is what we call shameless self-promotion, but my biggest fear is that we are going to permanently alter what I'll call the American DNA by injecting into our thought process, our how we interact with each other, a permanent fear of entrepreneurial activities, a permanent fear of going out on your own because of the sheer carnage that's taking place in front of all of us in real time. It's the ultimate economic driver's ed film, and sadly, we're stuck in the driver's seat watching it all move past us. Am I overreacting with that kind of fear, or do you think that's realistic?
That's, what is culture and what is, what constitutes a society is a really interesting question. And I really do believe that even though we're getting pummeled with all of this now, I do believe that the American dream has phenomenally deep roots. And I believe we can pull through this. It's going to take a lot of work. It's going to take a lot of perseverance. It's going to take a whole lot of people realizing that individual action will always beat out government mandates.
Excellent. And a healthy dose of libertarianism won't hurt either, will it?
Indeed.
Well, we've only got a couple of minutes left. JT, why don't you give us, like I said, we call it shameless self-promotion. Tell folks how they can volunteer for you, how they can contribute. Now, these days we're on the main LP Facebook page. So I will tell you from meeting candidates and talking to candidates offline from literally around the country, that $5 or $10 contribution that you make tonight after you get off the show, so one of the two or maybe even both of these gentlemen, all right, not only does it help in the aggregate, if half of the audience that watches this show, even for a few minutes tonight, each donated $5, I think there'd be a second American Revolution in Vermont. But spiritually, it also really fires people up when someone out of the blue, a complete stranger, becomes aware of your efforts and says, you know what, that guy can use my help, and I'm only happy to do so. So, JT, how can folks contribute, and how can they join you in that second American Revolution in Vermont?
Thanks, Pat. Yeah. So I'm at JT for State Senate. Well, I'm JT for State Senate on Facebook, and jtforstatesenate.com. You can donate there, and I'd be super grateful for that. It's certainly needed. There are incumbents that have been in place for over 10 years. It's the last election, only one senator was unseated. So it takes a good amount of funds and a good amount of effort to unseat these senators. Thank you if you do choose. Thank you.
Excellent. Archie, how about you?
I can be reached at BeLibertarianWithMeVT at protonmail.com, and also facebook.com/BeLibertarianWithMeVT.
Excellent. Who'd have thought, if you hadn't met these gentlemen at any one of our events before, that you could have an organization in Vermont that would be on fire for liberty, that could be so well informed, so aggressively fighting on behalf of everyone. Because remember, what happens in one jurisdiction reflects across the nation to all of us. Who'd have thought, huh? Well, it's everywhere. So I want to congratulate both of you on your efforts. As I've said so many times before, short of serving our nation in armed combat and armed defense, quite honestly, the most patriotic act that you can engage in for you, your community, your family, is running for office here in the United States, particularly in the year 2020. So my hat's off for both of you. I look forward to meeting you guys on the campaign trail when Joe makes it up there in just a couple of weeks. We're told the tour is going to happen between the 2nd and 5th of October, again, across New England. And I look forward to really raising some voices and making some noise alongside of you. It is a privilege as a fellow New Englander to fight alongside of both of you gentlemen. Thanks for joining us tonight.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much, Pat. Thank you very